I arrived at the schoolhouse before dawn, the way I had every morning for 3 years. The ritual was always the same: strike the match, coax the fire to life in the iron stove, sweep yesterday's chalk dust from the floor, arrange 12 slates on 12 desks of mismatched sizes, check the primers, sharpen pencils, prepare for another day of trying to reach children while the town watched and judged. 3 years of teaching had worn the idealism smooth. I'd come west believing education could change lives, that every child had potential waiting to be unlocked. Papa had believed that too. Teaching is about lighting fires, not filling buckets. He used to say, "But what do you do when the kindling is too wet? When you've run out of matches?" The schoolhouse was mine. Alone at this hour, one room, whitewashed walls, a map of the territories yellowing on the eastern wall. My father's old desk where I sat, one window faced east. I watched the sun rise every morning and wondered when I stopped believing sunrise meant new possibilities. "You're too soft-hearted, dear." I turned to find Mrs. Blackwell in the doorway, always the first to arrive, always ready with correction. She ran the girls' finishing school across town, taught proper posture and embroidery, and how to pour tea without making sound. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwell. I heard you let the younger children draw their letters in sand yesterday." She adjusted her gloves with precise movements. "Before slates? Really, dear, you must stop indulging these unconventional methods." I'd learned not to argue. "Yes, ma'am." Some children simply aren't suited for book learning. The sooner you accept that, the easier your position will become. She smiled, the kind smile of someone delivering hard truth for your own good. "You care too much. It will break you." After she left, I stood by the window and wondered if maybe she was right. I'd stopped counting how many times I'd been told I cared too much. Started wondering if maybe they were right. That afternoon, Mr. Crawford stopped by. He ran the boys' school, had been teaching for 27 years. Believed in discipline and memorization and the rod when necessary. "New student starting Monday," he said without preamble. "Difficult case, mother dead. Father overwhelmed. The boy doesn't speak much. From what I understand, don't waste too much effort." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. Another lost cause I'd be blamed for not saving. "I'll do my best." "I'm sure you will." He paused at the door. But sometimes, our best isn't enough. Best to learn that early. That night, I stayed late, preparing lessons for the week ahead. The sun set through my eastern window, turning everything gold. I thought about Papa, dying of pneumonia when I was 17. His last words, "You've got a gift for seeing people, truly seeing them. Don't waste it." I'd promised him I'd make a difference, find the children others overlooked. But I'd been protecting myself for 3 years now. Building walls. Learning not to invest too deeply in hopeless cases. The new boy would arrive Monday. I told myself I'd try for a month. Just 1 month. Then I could give up with a clear conscience. I was already giving up, really, already building walls. I didn't know yet that this boy would tear them all down. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. I'd prepared a desk in the back row. I'd learned it was easier that way. Struggling students became less visible from the back, less disruptive to the others. Daniel Carter walked in with his father just after 8. The father was a weathered man, railroad worker by the look of his hands, worn by grief and long hours. He apologized before the boy even sat down. "He don't talk much. His mama. Well, she passed 2 years back. He hasn't been the same since." I looked at Daniel, 11 or 12 years old, too thin, clothes clean but worn. What struck me most were his hands. He kept them very still on the desk, as if afraid to touch anything. But his eyes moved constantly, tracking everything: the other students, the map on the wall, the books on my desk, never meeting mine. "Welcome, Daniel. I'm sure we'll manage just fine." His father left. I introduced Daniel to the class, asked him to tell everyone his name. Silence. The other children giggled. I stopped them with a look, embarrassed for us both. Throughout the morning, I tried. Simple questions. "Can you read this word?" "Daniel." Silence. "Show me on the map where we live." Nothing. He sat perfectly still, staring at his desk, somewhere else entirely. The silence had texture. I'd learned that over 3 years. Some silences were defiant, some were afraid. Daniel's silence felt like absence, like he was somewhere I couldn't reach, no matter how I tried. At lunch, the other children ran outside. I stayed at my desk, pretending to grade papers, watching Daniel from the corner of my eye. He was the last to leave, but before he went, he arranged all the younger children's slates in neat rows, organized by size. I hadn't asked him to do this. He didn't wait for thanks, just did it, and left. That small gesture stayed with me all afternoon. The precision of it, the care. It reminded me of Tommy Jensen. 2 years ago, silent boy who turned out to be deaf in one ear. I'd fought for him, developed hand signals, got him seated closer. Mr. Crawford called it coddling. Tommy left school at 10 to work in his father's store. I still wondered if I'd failed him, if I'd fought hard enough. When Daniel left that day, I noticed his slate was still blank. Every assignment untouched. The primer I'd given him unopened. That night, I stayed late again. Prepared easier lessons. Primer work meant for 6-year-olds, not 12-year-olds. I told myself I was being practical. Really, I was already giving up. Just doing it slowly, so it would hurt less when he failed. The next morning, Daniel arrived before me. He'd already started the fire in the stove. I found him sitting at his desk in the cold room, hands folded, waiting. He didn't acknowledge my arrival. Didn't expect thanks for the kindness, but I noticed everything about Daniel Carter, even though I was trying hard not to care. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of the same pattern. Daniel arrived first each morning, started the fire without being asked, sat in his corner, stared at his blank slate while I taught. I tried everything I could think of. Simplified assignments returned blank. Gentle questions met with silence. Patient encouragement ignored. The other teachers noticed. "Poor thing is simple-minded," Mrs. Blackwell said at church. "You're wasting your time, dear." Even Reverend Hall's wife offered sympathy. Perhaps the Lord intends him for manual labor, not books. Not everyone is meant for learning. Friday evening, the school board called a meeting. 5 men who determined the future of education in our town, sitting around a table in the church basement. Daniel's father sat quietly in the corner. They discussed the Carter situation, the way you'd discuss weather or crop yields. "The boy has shown no progress," Mr. Crawford said. 3 weeks of patient instruction, and he cannot complete the simplest assignment. "It's not fair to the boy," another board member added, "making him sit through lessons he can't understand. Better to let him start honest work." Daniel's father looked relieved, ready to accept their verdict. His son would leave school, start full-time at the railroad depot. I don't know what possessed me. The words came out before I'd decided to speak them. "Give me until Christmas." Everyone turned. Mr. Crawford frowned. "Miss, we appreciate your dedication, but every child deserves a fair chance. 3 weeks isn't enough." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Give me until Christmas." If Daniel shows no improvement by then, I won't argue. The board members exchanged glances. Finally, the chairman nodded. Until Christmas, miss. But if he shows no progress, we expect you'll accept reality. I'd made a promise I had no idea how to keep. Worse, I'd made it publicly. The whole town would watch me fail. Why had I done this? For Daniel. For myself, to prove something to Mr. Crawford and Mrs. Blackwell, I went. Home that night and couldn't eat supper. Just sat by the window, watching autumn turn toward winter, wondering what I'd committed to. Monday morning, I explained to Daniel simply, "You have until Christmas to show me you can learn. I need you to try." He looked at me directly for the first time, really looked at me. His eyes were gray, serious, older than 11. He nodded once. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't promise. Just acknowledgement. "We'll figure this out together," I said, not believing it. He came early the next morning, started the fire for me again. We didn't speak about Christmas or promises or failure. We just began. I still didn't know how to reach him, but I'd promised to try, even if it broke us both. 6 weeks into our arrangement, I started noticing patterns, small things I'd missed before. Daniel arrived first every morning without fail, started the fire, organized slates, swept the floor, never asked for acknowledgement, just did these kindnesses and waited in his corner for the day to begin. During lessons, I began watching him more carefully. When I taught geography, his eyes fixed on the wall map with laser focus. He'd trace rivers with his gaze, follow mountain ranges, study territorial borders. When I read aloud on Friday afternoons adventure stories about explorers and expeditions, he leaned forward. Unconsciously, utterly absorbed, he was listening, really listening, just not responding in any way I could measure. I noticed other things too. The little acts of care I almost missed. When Sarah Montgomery's lunch pail broke, Daniel fixed it with wire and leather scrap. The repair was so neat that Sarah's mother came to ask who'd done the work. When little Tommy cried over a lost marble, Daniel whittled him a new one from a scrap of pine perfectly round, perfectly smooth. His hands were extraordinary, weathered for a boy his age, but precise beyond anything I'd seen. Carpenter's hands, Papa would have called them. Hands that knew exactly what they were doing. "Daniel," I said one afternoon during mathematics, "you don't have to write the answer. Just show me on your fingers. What's 7 plus 5? Nothing. His hands stayed folded on the desk. But that night, I found 12 small pebbles arranged on my desk. 7 in one group, 5 in another. I wondered when I'd started counting his footsteps before dawn. When his silence had become familiar instead of frustrating. When I'd started listening for the sound of the fire crackling to life. Knowing he'd arrived before me. In late October, Daniel was sick for 3 days. The schoolhouse felt wrong without him. Empty in a way it hadn't before. The fire started late. The slates stayed disorganized. I realized I'd been depending on his quiet presence more than I knew. When he returned, pale and thinner, I wanted to tell him I'd missed him. Instead, I just said, "Welcome back. Daniel, I'm glad you're feeling better." He nodded. That one nod that was his entire vocabulary. November arrived with sharp wind that rattled the schoolhouse windows. Christmas felt close now. The deadline approaching, I hadn't seen improvement in any conventional sense. His slate stayed blank. His primer unopened. The board would ask for evidence. I had none. Friday afternoon, I read them a story about Lewis and Clark mapping unknown territories. When I finished, every child ran outside for lunch, except Daniel. He sat very still, staring at the map on the wall. Just staring. I almost asked what he was thinking. But I'd learned silence had its own language. Sometimes the kindest thing was just to let him be. There was intelligence here. I was certain of it. But it was locked behind some door I couldn't find the key to. Maybe I was looking for the wrong door entirely. Late November afternoon, gray and cold. The students were at lunch. I was tidying the classroom, moving through the routine of straightening desks and collecting slates. I noticed papers spilling from Daniel's desk. I approached to organize them, expecting crumpled blank assignments. My hand touched the first sheet. I stopped breathing. Drawings, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, tucked carefully into every corner of his desk, folded and stacked and hidden away like treasure. I pulled them out slowly. My hands were shaking. Portraits of the other students, so lifelike they looked like photographs. Sarah's gap-toothed smile, the exact pattern of freckles across Emma's nose. Tommy's cowlick that never stayed flat. Each face rendered with stunning precision and unmistakable personality. Landscapes of the prairie. Every blade of grass individually drawn, the way light caught on wheat fields, clouds in perfect formation. The railroad depot where his father worked, I could count the individual planks in the platform. Studies of horses, birds, the schoolhouse itself from different angles. A drawing of Mrs. Blackwell that captured something sharp in her expression I'd never consciously noticed, but recognized instantly. At the bottom of the pile, I found one that stopped my heart. Daniel had drawn me. I was reading to the younger children on a Friday afternoon. The detail was perfect, the way I held the book. The slight smile I wasn't aware I made during adventure stories. The light from the east window catching my hair. But it was my expression that broke me. Joy. Pure, unguarded joy in teaching. I'd forgotten I still had that in me. I sat at my desk, holding this portrait, and cried, not sad tears, shocked tears, ashamed tears, revelatory tears. I'd been asking a bird to swim and calling it stupid for failing. All these weeks of trying to make Daniel prove himself through words when he'd been speaking fluently. Through images all along. Every lesson I'd taught about westward expansion, about geography and history and the natural world, it was all here in his drawings. Perfect comprehension expressed in the only language he had. How long had he been creating these months, years, sitting in the back of my classroom, failing every test I gave him, while producing masterpieces in secret? The failure wasn't his. It was mine. I'd been too blind to see what was right in front of me. I remembered what Papa told me when I started teaching. Every child has genius. Your job isn't to create it, just to recognize it. I'd failed that job for 3 months, but I wouldn't fail it anymore. When the students returned from lunch, I did something I'd never done before. Daniel, I said quietly, instead of writing today's lesson, will you draw it for me? Show me what a frontier settlement looks like. His hand moved instantly, confidently. Trading posts, wagon trains, tent cities, even Native American villages in the distance, teepees arranged in careful circles. Every detail I'd taught about westward expansion, captured with perfect understanding and stunning artistry. He understood everything, every single lesson, geography, history, science. It was all there. He'd been learning the entire time. I was just measuring his intelligence in the wrong language. That portrait of me, the joy in my face, that's who I used to be, who I still could be. Daniel hadn't just shown me his genius. He'd shown me mine. Reflected back, we'd been saving each other, and neither of us knew it. I stayed late that night, looking through every drawing, seeing my student for the first time. Outside, the first snow began to fall. Christmas was 3 weeks away, our deadline. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew exactly how Daniel learned. The question was, Would anyone else believe me? The week after my discovery, I created modified lessons for Daniel. Show me through pictures what you've learned. Geography. He drew accurate maps with mountain ranges, river systems, territorial boundaries in perfect proportion. History. He illustrated the Revolutionary War with battle formations, period-accurate uniforms, weaponry drawn in meticulous detail. Mathematics. He solved problems through visual diagrams that demonstrated complete understanding. I documented everything, built a portfolio, collected evidence. Thursday morning, I didn't hear Mr. Crawford enter. I was helping the younger children with their primers while Daniel sat in the back, drawing a diagram of the water cycle. Miss? I turned. Crawford stood in the doorway, face hard. A word. Outside, in the cold morning air. He didn't waste time. This is a schoolhouse, not an art studio. That boy should be reciting declensions, not doodling in the margins. He's not doodling, Mr. Crawford. He's demonstrating comprehension through a student who cannot read aloud, write compositions, or recite facts has not been educated. His voice was steel. This is not negotiable. Over the next days, the pressure built. Mrs. Blackwell visited during lunch. You're doing the poor boy no favors by indulging his limitations. Reverend Hall's wife stopped me after church. Soft-heartedness isn't kindness if it prepares him for nothing. Even some parents expressed concern. We want our children held to standards, miss, not coddled. Friday afternoon, I was summoned to an emergency board meeting. The 5 men were civil, but firm. Daniel had shown no improvement in conventional assessments. I must return to standard methods immediately. Written tests, oral recitations, traditional primers. If the boy cannot meet basic benchmarks by Christmas, the chairman said, he will be removed from school, and your teaching methods will undergo formal review. My teaching license. They were threatening my teaching license. I have evidence. I started. Daniel has mastered every subject I've taught. If you'll just look at his work, drawing is not evidence of education. Mr. Crawford said, it's evidence of distraction. I walked home through December wind that cut through my coat. I carried Daniel's portfolio, all that evidence I'd so carefully collected. But evidence of what that a boy could draw. The board wanted him to read aloud, write essays, recite multiplication tables on demand, everything I couldn't make him do. They wanted to force a square peg into a round hole and call it failure when it wouldn't fit. But I was the one holding the hammer. I was complicit in this, unless I chose not to be. I thought about all the Daniels before him, the children who learned differently, thought differently, saw the world through their own unique lens. How many had we broken trying to make them fit our molds? How many genius minds had we called deficient because they couldn't march to our drummer? That night, I spread Daniel's drawings across my small room. Maps, portraits, landscapes, studies of machinery and animals and plants. Each one proof of extraordinary intelligence, each one worthless by the board's standards. I had to choose. Fight for this boy and risk everything, or surrender and keep my safe. Quiet position. I didn't sleep, just watched the candle burn down, counting the cost of courage. Saturday morning, I woke exhausted. No school today. The boarding house was quiet except for Mrs. Patterson making breakfast downstairs. I couldn't eat. Just drank bitter coffee and stared at Daniel's drawings still spread across my small table. The practical arguments lined up in my mind with brutal clarity. I was 24 years old. 3 years of teaching experience. No family wealth to fall back on. If I lost this position, I'd have to return east, probably abandon teaching entirely. I was challenging men with decades of educational experience. Who was I to claim they were wrong? I drafted the letter carefully. Dear board members, upon reflection, I agree that Daniel Carter should be held to conventional academic standards. I will discontinue modified teaching methods and return to approved curriculum immediately. I apologize for any confusion my experimental approach may have caused. The words made me physically ill, but they were safe. They protected my future. I remembered Papa dying when I was 17. Pneumonia taking him in 3 days. His last words, hand gripping mine. You've got a gift for seeing people. Truly, seeing them. Don't waste it. I'd promised him I'd make a difference. Find the children others overlooked. Give them what they needed, not just what was easy. When had I stopped doing that, I looked at Daniel's portrait of me again. That expression of joy while reading to students. When did I lose that? Was it gradual, piece by piece every time someone told me I cared too much? Tried too hard. Believed too deeply. I envisioned 2 futures clearly. Path 1. Send the apology letter. Keep my position. Watch Daniel removed from school. Spend the next 30 years teaching by rote and dying inside. Path 2. Fight for Daniel. Probably lose. Possibly destroy my career, but at least know I tried. At least know I didn't betray that girl in the portrait who still believed teaching could change lives. But what if I was wrong? What if Daniel really did need conventional methods? What if my gift for seeing people was just naive stubbornness? What if Crawford and Blackwell were right, and I was too inexperienced to accept it? I picked up the letter of apology, held it over the candle flame, watched the corner brown curl, catch fire, let it burn completely, dropped the ashes in the wash basin. My hands shook, but they were steady enough. I'd become so good at protecting myself that I'd forgotten how to fight. Fear had made me careful, and careful had made me small. I'd been shrinking for 3 years, teaching smaller and smaller until I fit perfectly inside other people's expectations. When had I decided that was acceptable? Papa used to say, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding something matters more than your fear. Daniel mattered more. That boy with his silent genius and extraordinary gift. Sitting in the back of my classroom waiting for someone to see him, he mattered more than my safe future. Maybe I'd fail. Probably I'd fail. But I'd rather fail trying to change an unjust system than succeed by upholding it. That was the choice, really. Not success versus failure, integrity versus comfort. Sunday morning. I dressed carefully. Went to church like always. Smiled at Mrs. Blackwell and Mr. Crawford like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Tomorrow I'd walk into that schoolhouse and teach Daniel the way he needed to be taught. Consequences be damned. I'd document everything, build my case, present it to the board. If they fired me, so be it. At least I'd go down fighting for something that mattered. At least that girl in Daniel's portrait, the one who still believed in teaching, would recognize me, Monday through Friday before Christmas break. I taught Daniel openly using his visual methods. Fully documented. Other teachers noticed, disapproved, reported back to Crawford. I didn't hide anything. Let them watch. Let them judge. I was past caring about their opinions. Every day, Daniel demonstrated learning through drawing. Science lesson on plant cycles. He drew seed to flower, to seed again, with meticulous botanical accuracy. Mathematics visual proofs of geometric principles that would have impressed a university professor. English grammar. He diagrammed sentences through illustrated symbols that showed perfect understanding of structure. I borrowed Mrs. Patterson's son's camera, photographed Daniel's work, kept detailed notes, built my case brick by brick. Daniel knew something had changed. He watched me carefully now, saw me documenting his work, sensed the stakes. One afternoon, he left a drawing on my desk, a small sketch of me standing in front of the schoolhouse. Shoulders back, chin up. I looked brave in it, braver than I felt. Friday evening, 1 week before Christmas, the board meeting. The 5 board members, Mr. Crawford. Mrs. Blackwell invited as educational consultant. Daniel's father. And me. The room felt too small. Too warm. Judgment hanging in the air like smoke. I didn't apologize. Didn't hedge. Spoke clearly. Gentlemen, I've brought evidence that Daniel Carter has mastered every subject I've taught this term. I acknowledge this evidence is unconventional. I spread his portfolio across the table. Maps. Historical illustrations. Scientific diagrams. Mathematical proofs. Intelligence doesn't speak only one language. Daniel speaks through images. If we silence him because we don't understand his language, we fail not only him, but every child who learns differently. Mr. Crawford started to object. I kept talking. I'd like Daniel to demonstrate. With his permission, Daniel stood. I saw his hands trembling slightly, but his face was calm. Daniel, show us the water cycle. He drew it perfectly. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation, collection. Each stage labeled in his own visual language. Show us how you'd solve this multiplication problem. I wrote 14x6 on the board. Visual array, 14 rows of 6 dots each. Precise answer, 84. Draw me the structure of our territorial government. Branches of government. Checks and balances. All correct. All beautiful. He never spoke. He didn't need to. Old Mr. Hendricks, former surveyor, had been studying Daniel's maps with increasing attention. Now he spoke. These are extraordinary, professional quality. He looked up at me, then at Daniel. This boy has genuine spatial intelligence, probably sees the world in 3 dimensions, where the rest of us see 2. I've worked with trained cartographers who couldn't draft maps this accurate. The room shifted. Small, but perceptible. Another board member. Mr. Walsh. Cleared his throat. My own son struggled in school. Different boy, different challenges, but he's a fine carpenter now. Makes furniture people pay good money for. Maybe we've been measuring the wrong things all along. This sets dangerous precedent, Crawford argued. If we make exceptions for one student. What's the purpose of education? Hendricks interrupted. To create identical products or to develop each child's unique potential. The debate lasted an hour. Crawford insisting on traditional standards, Mrs. Blackwell calling it dangerous precedent. But Hendricks held firm. Walsh supported him. The chairman looked at Daniel's work for a long time. Finally, the board grants permission for modified instruction to continue, documented, supervised. With monthly progress reports, not unanimous, conditional, grudging, but permission, precedent. Standing there in front of those 5 men, I wasn't thinking about my career or my reputation. I was thinking about that girl my father raised, the one who believed every child deserved to be seen. She'd been sleeping for 3 years, but she was awake now. When Hendricks spoke up for Daniel, I realized I'd been wrong about one thing. I wasn't alone. There were others who questioned the system, who saw its failures. They just needed someone to speak first. Maybe courage isn't about being unafraid. Maybe it's about being afraid and speaking anyway. I walked Daniel and his father out into the December night. Snow was falling, soft and silent. His father shook my hand, couldn't speak around the thickness in his throat. Daniel looked at me directly, really looked at me, and smiled. Just the smallest smile. The first time I'd seen him smile all term. We'd won. Not everything, not permanently, but enough. For now. Enough. Spring term began with Daniel continuing to thrive. I taught him through his own language, visual, spatial, artistic. Other teachers stopped criticizing, started referring students with similar challenges instead. Miss, could you look at this child? He reminds me of your Daniel. I became known not as the soft young teacher, but as the educator who saw potential others missed. Over the next 3 years, I watched Daniel flourish. He graduated from my schoolhouse, moved to studying with a visiting art teacher, then won a scholarship to an art academy in San Francisco. The day he left for California, he was 16, still mostly silent. But his eyes spoke volumes, gratitude, hope, determination. I stayed in teaching, changed the system from inside, slowly. Trained other teachers in recognizing different forms of intelligence. Fought for students who didn't fit conventional molds, sometimes won, sometimes lost, but always fought. I gained a reputation. Some called me difficult, stubborn. I called myself awake. 10 years later, a thick envelope arrived from New York. Inside a letter from Daniel, now 26, and newspaper clippings. He wrote rarely, but when he did, the words were carefully chosen. Miss, I'm writing for my first major exhibition. The critics are calling my work the voice of the West. They say, I capture the frontier like no one else. They don't know the irony. I never had a voice, not the kind they wanted. You taught me I didn't need one. You saw me when I was invisible. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You were the first person who didn't ask me to be someone else. You just let me be who I already was. I read the newspaper articles with wonder. Daniel's paintings in museums from San Francisco to New York. Critics writing long analyses of his technique, his unique perspective, his unprecedented ability to capture the American West with both precision and soul. One critic wrote, Carter sees the landscape as a surveyor, sees maps in perfect spatial dimensions then, translates that vision into art. It's as if he's painting what the land actually is, not what we expect it to look like. With the letter came a small package, a painting, the old schoolhouse, rendered in exquisite detail. Through the window, children of all kinds, some reading, some calculating, some drawing. Each learning in their own way. Behind the teacher's desk, a woman who looked like me, younger, teaching with that expression of joy I'd forgotten I possessed. Beneath it, Daniel wrote, to the teacher who taught me that different doesn't mean deficient. Thank you for seeing me. I hung it in my current classroom. I'm still teaching, 20 years now, in a larger school. The painting reminds me every day why I chose this profession. I didn't save Daniel. I simply stopped trying to fix what was never broken. Sometimes that's the greatest gift a teacher can give, the permission to be exactly who you are. The recognition that your way of seeing the world is valid, valuable, necessary. People ask me sometimes if I'm proud of him, of what he became. Of course I am. But I'm prouder of what I became. That night I burned the surrender letter. I chose the teacher I wanted to be. Every day since, I've tried to honor that choice. Not always successfully, but always intentionally. This morning, a new student arrived. Quiet girl. Won't meet my eyes. Struggles with reading. Other teachers have already labeled her. I smile, because I know something they don't. Genius has many languages. My job isn't to force her into ours. It's to learn hers. I set out a box of colored pencils next to her primer, just in case. We'll see what happens. After all, that's what teaching is, seeing what others miss, believing what others doubt, fighting for what others dismiss. 20 years ago, a silent boy taught me that. I've been teaching it to others ever since.